Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. Women and children were slapped and beaten, children cry in fear, Zainab full of tears. Oh my brother dear, oh my brother dear, I wish you were here, I wish you were here. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. Saviors of Islam, I sent my salam upon you, masters. When I drink water, all my love for you and my life for you, I will beat my chest, I will never rest. I will give my life, I will sacrifice in my life always. Your flag is raised high in my life always. Your flag is raised high. Hussein ya Mawla, ya Mawla, ya Mawla. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. Hussein ya Mawla, ya Mawla, ya Mawla. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer.
فاتحہ. کربلا سے جو کبھی ہو کے ہوا آتی ہے، کربلا سے جو کبھی ہو کے ہوا آتی ہے، کسی معصوم کی ہچکی کی صدا ہے، کربلا سے جو کبھی کون سوتا ہے کنارے تیرے اے نہر فرات، کون سوتا ہے کنارے تیرے اے نہر فرات، تیری مٹی سے ابھی بھی وفا آتی ہے، تیری مٹی سے ابھی بوئے وفا آتی ہے، کربلا سے جو کبھی کوئی بیمار نہ پڑتا ہو تہجد کی نماز، کوئی بیمار نہ پڑھتا ہو تہجد کی نماز، رات کو بیڑیوں کی کیوں یہ صدا آتی ہے، کربلا سے جو کبھی ہاں دھڑکتا نہ ہو खद में कहीं खलबे रुबाब अली असगर की सदा आती है करबला से जो कभी जब कभी ज्यादा मैं बीमार जो हो जाता हूँ जब कभी ज्यादा मैं बीमार जो हो जाता हूँ खुद ब खुद मेरे लिए खाके शिफाती है करबला से जो कभी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद
Sorry? Yeah. Oh, she can move up. It worked good. It worked good. There's no sign of baby. Every day some goddamn thing.
As time progresses, especially now that when we talk about temptations, we are not just talking about physical temptations. Rather, in this day and age, more and more the temptations are in the form of online ones. And therefore, this is a topic that potentially every single person can be affected by the teachings that we are going to be discussing today. And inshallah, we will see first of all a little bit about this great prophet, Prophet Yusuf, who in English, of course, is known as Prophet Joseph. So let me just start off with presenting a brief overview about this great prophet of God. Just like I've been doing on all the other nights, it's important to know a bit about the prophet that we're discussing. We become more acquainted with that prophet, and then when we discuss a particular story that the topic is related to, we have a better context and background to it, inshallah. Let's begin our discussion with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So Nabi Yusuf, of course, his father is Nabi Yaqub ala nabiyina wa alayhi salam, and he was residing in the place in Palestine, which is in present day, in the place which is Hebron in present day Palestine. Now, Nabi Yaqub had children from a number of different wives, but the youngest of all of his children were Yusuf and Benjamin, or Benjamin as is known in English. So Yusuf and Benjamin were full brothers. All Yusuf's other brothers were half brothers. Now what happened was the other brothers had this jealousy against Nabi Yusuf because of the love that Nabi Yaqub had for him. And so they decide to devise a plot which will get rid of Yusuf, and then they wanted to have the attention and the love of their father all for themselves. So what is the plot that they devise? They say to their father that allow us to take Yusuf for play, and so reluctantly Nabi Yaqub agrees. But what their plot was to throw Nabi Yusuf in a well, and then probably a caravan would come along, take Nabi Yusuf to a distant land, and that will be him gone, and they will be rid of him. So this is what they do. They manage to persuade their father to let Nabi Yusuf go with them. They take him, they throw him in a well. They come back and they lie to their father, saying that he's been eaten by a wolf. And so Nabi Yaqub begins all of that mourning which he's famous for, the crying and the weeping for his son Nabi Yusuf. So now Nabi Yusuf is at the bottom of a well. What happens is indeed a caravan does come along and does find him there and picks him up, and he is sold to, he's taken to Egypt and he's sold to a person who's referred to as Aziz, a nobleman of Egypt. This Aziz has a very large palace where he is living, and Nabi Yusuf now is a servant of this Aziz in that grand palace type of place. This is where we pick up the story and where the whole topic of resisting temptations starts to come in. What happens now? Well, we are told in verses 23 to 25 about the incident that takes place with Zalika. Of course, often she's also known, her name is pronounced as Zuleika, but apparently Zalika is more accurate. In any case, what happens is Zalika is attracted to Yusuf. She solicits him. She wants to try and seduce him. So now look at the scenario that we are in. It is such a precarious scenario that actually Nabi Yusuf did remarkably well in order to get out of the temptations that were there. Then we'll see the 4 strategies he used in order to resist temptations, which inshallah, these are 4 general strategies that all of us can adopt whenever we are faced with any type of temptation. And then later on, I would like to focus on the temptations of the opposite gender. In any case, the 4 general strategies. What happens in the scenario first of all? Zalika has him now in her inner chamber. So there were a number of chambers in this palace, and they were now in the innermost one. That's one. Secondly, Zalika is reported to have been extremely attractive. Thirdly, Yusuf himself is unmarried. Fourthly, all the doors are locked. So nobody would have known. If anything had happened, nobody would have known anyway. Now look at the situation that he's in. How does he get out of this situation? The first thing he does is he recites those verses that I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture. The first of these strategies is that he says, قَالْ مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ. He does isti'adha. He seeks refuge in Allah. This is the first strategy that we must always adopt whenever we are faced with evil temptations. Seek isti'adha. Isti'adha means seek refuge in Allah. In fact, we do this all the time. But how do we do it and how should we do it? The way we normally do it is that we just say, A'udhu billah minash shaitani rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the outcast shaitan. A'udhu billah, we say all the time. Is that isti'adha? It's called isti'adha, but is it true and real isti'adha? The isti'adha of Yusuf? Or is it just simply us saying it with our tongues? We're just articulating some words. If it's just articulating some words, that's not going to have the impact that the isti'adha of Nabi Yusuf had on him. So what is true isti'adha? True isti'adha and seeking refuge in Allah means that we practically do something to get away from that danger. This is what is meant. It's like somebody, he hears of a bomb, and the bomb is, say, for example, in the car park there, and they just stand there, they just sit there, and they just say, I must seek shelter from this bomb that's out there. But they don't do anything. We would all laugh at that person. What are you doing? You're just sitting there and saying it. Why don't you run away? Why don't you take shelter? Go under a table or hide or do something that will really be isti'adha, will really enable you to take refuge. So it's like that. If we are just saying it, it's not going to have that impact. We must do something. We are told in verse 25 of Surah Yusuf what he did. وَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابِ. What he did, this verse says that they both ran to the door. So we are told that actually when Zulaykha was advancing and trying to solicit him, he actually took steps. He ran away. And you all know the story, what happened. She grabs him from behind and that saves him. But in any case, he did something practically. He didn't just say ma'adallah. He meant it sincerely and he did something to get away from that danger. This is isti'adha. The first step we must take whenever we want to resist any temptation. Then what does he do? Look what the verse says. He says, Innahu Rabbi. Indeed, he is my Lord. Now, here what Nabi Yusuf is doing is acknowledging who his Lord is. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he refers to him by using this name of his, Rabb. Out of all the names he could have used, he uses this name. Why? Well, when we look at this word Rabb, yes, we translate it as Lord, but it incorporates a number of important attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fact that he is our nourisher as well. He is our sustainer as well. He's the one who looks after us. So when Nabi Yusuf is saying, Innahu Rabb, this is the second strategy that we must all adopt when we are trying to resist temptation. We acknowledge Allah as our Rabb. Meaning that we think to ourselves, Allah, if He's our Rabb, He's sustaining us. He's looking after us. He is nourishing us. So then why do I need to succumb to this temptation? Why do I need to look at this sight? Why do I need to look at her? Why do I need to look at him? Why? When Allah is my Rabb, He is going to provide for me just as He has been provided for me all of these years. Has He neglected me? He hasn't. Whatever I needed, He's given me. And therefore, Him being my nourisher, my Lord, my sustainer, He will provide for me in a halal way. He will make sure that just as He has done up to now, He will give me that, but in a halal way, in a lawful manner. That's strategy number 2. The third strategy He uses, what does He say? He says, Ahsana mathwai. That means that He has provided for me a good abode. So remember where Nabi Yusuf was? He was in the bottom of the well. What happens? He is taken out of the well. Now he's in that grand place. So he's acknowledging the bounties of Allah. Strategy number 3. We should acknowledge the bounties and the blessings of Allah. When we're faced with temptation, just take a time out. Think about what Allah has given you already. What has He given me? He has given all of us our health, our possessions, our family, our iman. The fact that we are the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, the fact that we gather here on these type of occasions to commemorate the sacrifices of Sayyid al-Shuhada. These are all great blessings. Our community, any other things that He's given us, any knowledge, experience, whatever it might be. We acknowledge our blessings. You know what happens? When we don't acknowledge our blessings, we become more and more greedy. Think about it for a moment. The one who doesn't appreciate what he already has will always want more. When he always wants more and more and more, he's got a spouse, he's got a house, he's got a car, he's got all of these blessings, he still wants another one. Why? If he acknowledges and he appreciates what he's already got, he won't want another thing. But sometimes we are ungrateful. We don't appreciate what we have already. This opens the doors for temptations to come in. It is a channel for all of these temptations to have an effect on us. Let's remember our blessings and acknowledge them. That's strategy number 3. And then what? Finally, the 4th general strategy he uses, he says, إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. He says that indeed the unjust ones, the wrongdoers, the transgressors will not be successful. What is he doing here? He is actually remembering the akhirah, that everything will have a hisab and a kitab. Everything will have accounting. Nothing will go without it being written. So he remembers the akhirah, that whatever little thing, big thing, whatever he does is going to be accounted for. The dhalimun will not be prosperous. And therefore we should remember the akhirah. Not only akhirah, but the consequences in general. Let's remember that as strategy number 4. The consequences. There's the akhirah, certainly. Allah's not going to let anything, small or big, go at all. But what else He does is that He acknowledges this. Now, when we think about the consequences, it's also dunyawi consequences. Just let's ask ourselves, what would happen if we were caught out here? What would happen if I was seen? What would happen in terms of my reputation, in terms of the community's reputation? I'm a Shia of the Ahlul Bayt. How am I going to answer to the Ahlul Bayt on the Day of Judgment? At the end of the day, our Imam Zamana Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Faraju Sharif, is seeing everything that we do. And therefore, why is it that I need to do this? So you see, my brothers and sisters, all of these 4 strategies are extremely important for us to bear in mind. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So now these were 4 general strategies that he uses. What is the result of this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us after these 4 strategies, كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَى. Because he did all of that, Allah says, thus we kept him away. We kept all evil and indecency away from him. This is what we mean by resisting temptation. Allah will keep away asu, meaning evil, and fahsha, indecency, away from us. These are the things that we will benefit from this story of this great prophet, Nabi Yusuf. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So now let's move on and examine this whole concept of our role versus shaitan's role. What is it that we do to allow temptations to come in? What does shaitan do? This is a question that is often asked. Is it shaitan who's making us do all of these things? Or is it us? Do we blame ourselves or do we blame shaitan? Let's look at this from again the Quranic perspective. We are told in Surah Ibrahim, verse number 22, that actually on the day of judgment, shaitan will have his answer. You know what this verse tells us? The verse tells us that on the day of resurrection, shaitan is just going to say, I had no authority over you. All I did was to invite you. I just called you and you responded. Then he will say, فَلَا تَلُومُونِي وَلُومُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. These words, my brothers and sisters, if we really pay attention to them and we keep them with us, it will really have an impact on our lives. Especially when we are faced with temptations. He says in this verse, shaitan, remember, he's talking on the day of resurrection. What will he say? He will say that, so don't blame me, blame yourselves. Let's remember this when we are next faced with any temptation. It's not shaitan. He just simply invites, we accept. So he will have his answer. Don't blame me, blame yourselves. Let me explain it in another way. Think about a fortress. This fortress has an enemy on the outside. This enemy is dying to come in and wreak havoc inside the fortress. However, the fortress is being protected. It has 3 gates. Each of these gates has an army behind it. And each army is making sure that that door is closed, that gate is closed, that one is closed. As long as that army remains strong and keeps those doors closed, that fortress will always be protected. That enemy on the outside won't be able to come in. What is this example illustrating? This is what happens when we are faced with temptation and we deal with the temptation and the role of shaitan. So the fortress here is us. That's our soul. The 3 gates. What are the 3 gates? They are the gates that are the 3 main faculties of a human being. In traditional Islamic ethics, they talk about these faculties. The faculty of imagination, the faculty of anger, and the faculty of desire. Then, the whole philosophy behind this is that there is a 4th faculty as well. The faculty of the intellect, the aql. So now, the 3 gates are the 3 faculties of desire, anger, and imagination. What is the army here? The army is the faculty of the intellect. And what is that enemy? That enemy is shaitan. So now, let's put it all together. How does this work? What this is saying is that the fortress, us, we have these 3 gates. If those gates, meaning desire, anger, and imagination, if we do not control them by the army was the intellect. If the intellect is not in charge of these 3 other faculties, then those gates will open. As soon as those gates open, that enemy will come in. That enemy is shaitan. So who lets in the enemy? Does shaitan force himself onto us? He doesn't. He can't. As long as we are controlling those 3 faculties by our intellect. as soon as those three faculties become weak, because our intellect is no longer in charge, the gates open for shaitan to come in and he will go on a rampage. This is what happens when we succumb to temptations and then we engage in sin. It is not shaitan forcing himself on us. Remember his answer. I just invited you. You accepted my invitation. فَلَا تَلُومُونِي وَلُومُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. So don't blame me, but blame yourselves. If we bear this in mind, on the day of resurrection, that's what he's going to say, then really this will help us to resist temptation. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So now let's move on and examine one of the greatest temptations that there are. What is the prime, if you like, temptation that so many people succumb to? It is the temptation of the dunya, the worldly realm. Now, in order to just discuss this for a few moments, and then I want to talk very specifically about the temptations of the other gender, because that's something extremely important, especially for my younger brothers and sisters to bear in mind. Now, first of all, the dunya. When we talk about the dunya, it is a temptation. But often, people, they need to understand what exactly is meant by the dunya. Is it all evil? Is it all negative? Or is there a different way of looking at it? Often we say all the time that we must shun the dunya, we must not go after the dunya, we must resist the temptations of the dunya. But look at it like this. There's a beautiful tradition from Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. He says, Ad-dunya dunya'an, dunya balag wa dunya mal'una. It is such a phenomenal tradition. He says the dunya is really of two types, dunya'an. The first type is dunya balag, the dunya that enables somebody to achieve and attain the akhirah. Then he says, wa dunya mal'una. That is the cursed dunya. So here, when we look at it like this, we understand that the dunya is of two types. There's a positive meaning to it and there's a negative meaning to it. One enables us to get closer to Allah and achieve the akhirah in a greater sense. The other one is cursed. It takes us away from Allah. Now, there's this great scholar. You all heard of him, Allama Muhammad Baqir al-Majlisi, the compiler of that great work, Biharul Anwar, which translates as the Bihar, the seas of Anwar, lights. So seas of lights. This work took him and his students, you know how long? Over 30 years to compile. It is our greatest work in terms of the quantity of traditions that we have. 110 volumes of the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. All of us are indebted to this great scholar, Allama Muhammad Baqir al-Majlisi, for compiling this work. Now, what does this work talk about when it comes to this tradition? Allama Majlisi didn't just compile traditions from all over the place. That in itself is a great achievement, because he's put them into subject matter. Remember, we're talking over 300 years ago. At that time, there wasn't any computers to do this stuff for you. Just imagine organizing 110 volumes worth of traditions in thematic way, in terms of different subjects and themes. But he didn't just do that. He even writes commentary on many of the traditions. When it comes to this tradition from the fourth holy Imam, he explains it like this about the two types of dunya. He says, I'm paraphrasing, but in a summarized way, he basically says, whatever takes you closer to Allah is your akhirah. Whatever takes you further from Allah is your dunya. Even though you might be doing something that appears to be your akhirah, it could be your dunya. And vice versa. Something that appears to be your dunya, it might be your akhirah. Let me give you a few examples. Let's take knowledge. If somebody was to say knowledge, is it a dunyavi thing or an ukhravi thing? You would probably say, well, it's an ukhravi thing. We're always encouraged to seek knowledge. We know the status of knowledge in Islam is so great. It must be something relating to the akhirah. But according to this, it could be your dunya. If you went after knowledge with the wrong intention, you went after knowledge in order to get some great position in society where people are now going to give you all praise. That's what you want. In order so that you have power. In order so that you just accumulate wealth for worldly reasons. To satisfy your ego. To impress others. That knowledge, it could be very important knowledge. That is not an ukhravi thing. That is your dunya. But somebody who seeks knowledge in order to act upon it, to get closer to Allah, to help others get closer to Allah, to help humanity, that becomes their akhirah. Money. If somebody was to ask you, is money an ukhravi thing or a dunyavi thing? Normally people would say it's a dunyavi thing. But money again, we have to look at it like this. If it's going to get you closer to Allah, so I'm earning in order to provide for myself and my family, in order to help humanity, to donate to this charity, to help the community here. That, what appears to be a dunyavi thing, is actually an ukhravi thing. And the opposite happens as well. If you are just doing it for materialistic purposes, to have a luxurious life, you don't care about anyone else, how they are in society, that becomes a dunyavi thing. This is what is meant. When we talk about temptations and resisting them, temptations could be money, it could be power, it could be fame, it could be position, it could be possessions, objects, all of these temptations, members of the opposite gender, but it's not the thing itself intrinsically that's good or bad. It's not the thing itself. It's how we use it, how we approach it, the intention we go after it, and ultimately if it's going to get us closer to Allah or not. This is the explanation from this great scholar based on that phenomenal tradition from Imam Zainul Abidin salawatullah wasalamu alayhi. So we saw yesterday, for example, the story of Nabi Sulaiman. What didn't Nabi Sulaiman have? We saw that actually Allah blessed him with an amazing kingdom and with tremendous power and excellent knowledge. He knew the language of the birds and other creatures. He had jinn in his army. Jinn would dive in the sea to find hidden treasure for him. He had birds in his army. He could hear the language of ants. He could control the winds. What didn't Nabi Sulaiman have? But look how he used it. He used it in a way that enabled him and others to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not the objects themselves, it's how they use the intention and how they have an effect on us and our souls. What about people that are the greatest leaders that we have in the history of Islam, like Rasulullah and Amirul Mu'mineen salawatullah wasalamu alayhim ajma'een? When they were leaders of the ummah, they had access to so much, but how did they use it? I'll give you one example of the life of Amirul Mu'mineen. It's reported that when he went out to the battle of Siffin, he gets to a place called Dhiqar. There, Ibn Abbas comes to him and he sees Mawla Amir, he's stitching his own shoe up. Allahu Akbar. Which leader do you know who would actually stitch his own shoe up? Usually the leaders have, I don't know how many hundreds of pairs of shoes. If they wear it once, perhaps they don't want to wear it again. He not only would wear the same pair of shoes, but when they would get holes, he himself would stitch them up. So he sees him stitching it up. As he comes in, Amir al-Mu'mineen asks him, he says to him that, in your opinion, what value does this shoe have? And Ibn Abbas says, well, it doesn't have any value. You know what Mawla Amir replies to him? He says to him, by Allah, this shoe would have more value to me than ruling over you, were it not for the fact that by ruling over you, I can establish what is right and ward off what is wrong. This is how they saw power. This is how they saw position, in order to establish what is right and to ward off what is wrong. It's not power itself, it's not position itself, it's how it's used. Does it get someone closer to Allah or not? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So now let's move on and look at the whole area of temptations from the opposite gender. Now, what I'd like to do here is present some strategies specific to this. Those 4 strategies that Nabi Yusuf used were general for all temptations of the dunya and whatever it might be. These strategies are especially aimed at resisting the temptations of the opposite gender. The first thing that we are told to do in the Quran, in Surah Nur, verses 30 and 31, is to lower our gaze. This is a brilliant strategy for resisting that type of temptation. Lower our gaze, Allah tells us. Both He tells men in verse 30 and women in verse 31. Because our eyes are actually the primary gateway to our emotions. Think about it. Our eyes are the primary gateway to our emotions. When we see something, it has an impact, and it can possibly play up on our imagination. I spoke about the faculty of imagination a few moments ago. This is where the intellect comes in and must not let the imagination run riot. It must not, just because we've seen something, sometimes if the intellect is not in control, it plays all sorts of tricks. It conjures up scenarios. It makes up all types of fantasies even. We have to nip it in the bud. Stop it right at the source. How do we do that? By cutting off that channel. Lower your gaze, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells men and women. So that if you do that, it doesn't even get to the stage where now you are trying to deal with that situation. You've seen it and it's so hard for you to forget. Second strategy is that we have to make sure we are not attending those places where there's temptations. Sometimes we go to places, or people go to places, and really, if they hadn't gone there, they wouldn't have been tempted. They went there and they got tempted and it led to whatever. Resist temptation by not going to those places. Everybody knows what they are. So, it's just like a fire. A fire will always be burning at a particular temperature, whether we are close to it or not. That fire is going to burn at that temperature. However, when is it that we are going to feel that heat of the fire? It's only when we get close to it. It's always going to be there, whether we are this close or that far. It's always going to be burning. It's only when we come close to it, the closer and closer and closer we get, we begin to feel the heat, and then we eventually begin to burn. So this is the thing with these places of temptation. Let's not even get close to the fire. That's why in the Quran Allah says in a number of places, don't go near this, don't go near that. Why even go near it? Avoid those places and then you won't feel the heat. Thirdly, especially for my younger brothers and sisters, talk to someone who you respect, who is wise, who is pious. They will often give you excellent advice. Don't think that you're all alone. They went through it themselves. Talk to someone pious, wise, learned, someone you trust, and inshallah you'll get good advice from them. Fourthly, avoid flirtatious language and behavior. This is something that happens all the time. Sometimes we don't even realize it. Flirtatious language, just a little bit of a joke there, just pushing it a little bit too far there. And behavior, getting a little bit too close to someone, Or perhaps one of the things that I see quite a lot, please stop this. High-fiving. High-fiving non-mahram. What's all that about? You know, a quick high five. This touching of a non-mahram is haram. You can't do that. I'll come to shaking hands in a moment because that's something very, very important. That's another strategy. Another one is that we must always try and feed our souls those spiritual things that it needs. We always need an alternative. So when we are not going after these temptations, we need to feed our souls spiritual things. So it could be studying something Islamic or studying something else, something good. It could be listening to lectures. It could be reading the Quran, contemplating on it, du'as. It could be looking at the stories of the prophets as we've been doing. Feed the soul, engage in ibadah, for example, go on a ziyarah trip. All of these things are helping the soul to get stronger and stronger. And finally, the sixth and final strategy that I would like to put forward and spend just a minute longer on it is avoid physical contact with non-mahram. So this includes a number of things. It could be, like I said, just a quick, high five or something like that. It could be brushing past someone. It could be just kind of getting too close to someone. Why sit there? There's a place there. You don't have to sit there. Stand far away. Sit far away. Make sure there's that gap between yourselves. Then comes the whole issue of shaking hands. Now, of course, this is something that we're always faced with, living in the West in particular. What do we do here? First of all, shaking hands. What's the problem here? The problem is skin-to-skin contact. When we have a skin-to-skin contact, especially with a member of the opposite gender who's non-mahram, it has an effect on our soul. Perhaps we don't realize it immediately, but it is extremely, extremely negative on us. So what happens is, often it will just start with a handshake, any skin-to-skin contact, but then it plays up on our minds. It has an effect, therefore avoid it. What are the rulings of this? I will just briefly mention the rulings as Ayatollah Al-Uzma As-Sayyid As-Sistani, may Allah protect him and all of our Maraja inshallah, puts them forward with regards to shaking hands. What is the fiqhi ruling? Well, what he says is, first stage, if it's possible, try to avoid those places where you know most probably you'll have to shake hands. That's the first step. Okay, a lot of the time it might not be possible. So he's saying that only if it's necessary, go to those places where you think that you will be required to shake hands. Only if it's necessary. If it's necessary, then okay, you go there. So what's the next step? You're there now, and the whole scenario is such that somebody wants to shake your hand and it is going to be haram. So now what do you do? He says, in that situation, try your best not to shake hands. So you apologize, you might have to explain. And another thing you could do is to wear gloves. I know over here, it might not be so practical, but in England, for example, it's a bit more practical to do because of the weather situation. And people, women, they do this in particular. So he says, again, it's all to do with that skin-to-skin contact. But another thing that mu'mineen can do is to make sure they are carrying something with them. This is another little tip. Carry something with yourselves so that if you're in that situation, your hands are already occupied. So it saves you some embarrassment. Anyway, so he says, if it's necessary, then go. If it's not necessary, don't go. If you're there, the situation comes out, don't shake hands, wear gloves, or say sorry, whatever. Try to make sure that you are not shaking hands. But then what? The final stage is this. If you think that it is excessively difficult, right? Not just difficult, because of course it is difficult to say no or whatever, but excessively difficult for you to say no, or it gives you hardship, then you are allowed. Okay, but this is the criterion: excessive difficulty and hardship, meaning it would be normally unbearable for someone in that situation. So this is the way they define excessive difficulty and hardship: that which is normally unbearable. Okay, so if it gets to that stage, then like for an ordinary person, it's normally over what is bearable for a normal person. That's when you're allowed to shake hands. So as a summary, before we mention a few words of Masa'ib, today we looked at another great prophet in the Quran, Nabi Yusuf, and we related it to the whole concept of resisting temptation in Islam. After we saw some things about Nabi Yusuf, we put his story into context where he's faced with Zalika's temptations. He resisted them using these 4 strategies. 1, isti'adha. 2, acknowledging Allah is our Lord. 3, our bounties and our blessings, we remember them. And 4, we remember the consequences both in the akhirah and in the dunya. Then we saw the whole idea of shaitan and his role. He does not force himself on us. He doesn't force temptation on us. We let him in when our aql is weak and is not controlling faculties of anger, imagination and desire. Then we saw the whole idea of dunya. The dunya is of 2 types, a negative type, positive type. Positive is when it helps us to get close to Allah. Negative enables us to get further from Allah. We saw some examples of great leaders who were using the dunya in the positive sense. And then finally we put forward these 6 strategies for resisting temptations of the opposite gender. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya ibna Rasulillah. Sallallahu alayka wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifina'ik. Alayka minni salamullahi abada. Ma baqitu wa baqiya al-laylu wan-nahar. ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. All together please. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Whenever anybody goes to Karbala, they will see there's a shrine in the haram of Abu Abdullah that is a little bit separated from the main shrine. That shrine belongs to Habib ibn Muzahir al-Asadi. How fortunate this great martyr of Karbala is that whenever anybody goes for the ziyarah of Abu Abdullah, they also pass by his shrine and do his ziyarah as well. Habib ibn Muzahir, this 75-year-old great soldier of Sayyidul Shuhada, was somebody very respected in Kufa. He was a companion of Amirul Mu'mineen. He was a companion of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. He's referred to in that letter of Abu Abdullah when he invites him to come to Karbala as being a learned man. Habib ibn Muzahir represented the older generation of society. Karbala has a representation of all groups in society, from Habib ibn Muzahir all the way down to a 6-month-old baby. But in any case, now let's look at this great warrior and his sacrifices. Habib ibn Muzahir is reported when he comes to Karbala, the holy lady Zainab al-Kubra is so happy to hear of his coming that she sends her salams to Habib. Habib immediately when he hears this, he sits on the ground. He takes a handful of the soil and he throws that soil on his face and on his head. And he says that what position and what difficulty must Lady Zainab be in so that she is now sending her salams to someone like me. Now Habib ibn Muzahir, is reported that when he finally goes out to fight on the battle, he comes out with a radiant face. He comes out with his sword in hand. This 75-year-old soldier of Sayyidul Shuhada, with his white beard, with his hair flowing, he comes out. As he does so, he recites these words of poetry. These are his battle cries that tell us about his great character. He says, Ana Habibun wa Abi Muzahir. I am Habib and my father is Muzahir. Farisu Hayja'a wa Harbun Tus'ar. And I am a horseman of flaming battle and war. Now Habib ibn Muzahir fights bravely. He kills many of the enemy soldiers. But now one of the soldiers, they strike him with their sword. Another one stabs him with their spear. Habib ibn Muzahir falls. He tries to get up again. As he does so, another person strikes him over the head with his sword. Habib ibn Muzahir falls face long onto the sands of Karbala. At that point, another soldier comes up behind him. He sits on his back. He grabs the white hair of Habib ibn Muzahir and then he severs his head. Look how the reporter describes the effect it had on Abu Abdullah. The reporter says, فَحَدَّ مَقْتَلَهُ الْحُسَيْنِ. The killing of Habib crushed Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein repeats this verse, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. But Mu'mineen, is reported by some people that actually now, afterwards, there was a young boy and he saw a horseman. This horseman was riding, but this horseman had tied something to the horse. When this boy looks at it, he sees that there is a head tied onto the horse. The horseman is riding along in the streets of Kufa, dragging this head behind him. This boy is following this head. The horseman notices him behind him. He says, "Oh boy, what do you want?" He says, "Nothing." He says, "No, tell me, you do want something." He says to him, "Can you give me this head back? Because this is the head of my father Habib ibn Muzahir and I want to bury it." But look how depraved those people were. He says no, because he wanted to trade it in with Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad for a reward. But Mu'mineen, I will end with this comparison. I will say to you this, that of course the head of Habib ibn Muzahir wasn't the only one that was desecrated. They also desecrated the heads of the Shuhada. But there were some similarities and some differences. Yes, all the heads were severed. They were all desecrated and disrespected. But there were some differences. First of all, instead of dragging them in the streets of Kufa, they placed their heads on top of spears. Secondly, instead of taking them all along the streets of Kufa, they paraded those heads in the streets of Sham and Kufa. And finally, instead of that young boy following the head and looking at the head, it was Sakina, it was Lady Zainab, it was the women and the children who had to look at the heads of the Shuhada. Allah la'natullah al-qawmi al-zalimin. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. Oh Allah, we ask you by the right of Abu Abdullah that you protect our Imam and you hasten his appearance. Oh Allah, enable us to learn and act according to those stories of the prophets in the Quran. Oh Allah, enable us to resist temptation effectively. Oh Allah, enable us to use the dunya in its correct sense. Oh Allah, bless all those who are facing difficulties around the world and give them relief, including those in the Carolinas. Oh Allah, enable us to always live and die with the wilayah of the Ahlul Bayt. And oh Allah, forgive us and our forefathers for our sins. Matame Hussein.
Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. اے کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، اے کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، اے کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، کربلا نہ بلانا، ورنہ تجھے بھی سارا، ورنہ تجھے بھی سارا بلا دے گا زمانہ، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، کربلا ان ریت کے اڑتے ہوئے ذرات سے کہنا، ان ریت کے اڑتے ہوئے ذرات سے کہنا، اصغر کی یہی قبر ہے، اصغر کی یہی قبر ہے، اس کو نہ مٹانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، خیمے سے ننگے پاؤں چلی کس طرح زینب، خیمے سے ننگے پاؤں چلی کس طرح زینب، یہ بات علمدار کو، یہ بات علمدار کو ہرگز نہ بتانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، تجھ کو کیا ہے کرب و بلا کس نے معلا، تجھ کو کیا ہے کرب و بلا کس نے معلا، یہ خون ہے رسول کا، یہ خون رسول کا، اس کو نہ چھپانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، بالوں سے منہ چھپائے ہوئے جاتی ہے زینب، بالوں سے منہ چھپائے ہوئے جاتی ہے زینب، اے تیز ہوائیں کو نہ، اے تیز ہوائیں کو نہ چہرے سے ہٹانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، کربلا حسین کے غم کو نہ بلانا، کربل کی کہانی جب کوئی بھی سنائے گا، کربل کی کہانی جب کوئی بھی سنائے گا، کربل کی کہانی جب کوئی سوکھی ہوئی آنکھوں سے سوکھی ہوئی آنکھوں سے آنسو نکل آئے گا کربل کی کہانی جو کوئی بھی سنائے گا کربل کی کہانی کوئی ہر غم ملے گا تم کو آغوش نینوا میں کیسی غذا ہے چائے زہرا کے باغباں میں قرآن کربلا میں بکھرا نظر آئے گا کربلا کی کہانی جا کوئی بھی سنائے گا کربلا کی کہانی جا کوئی بھی سنائے گا اکبر سے نوجوان سینے پہ برچ کا کر رخ مار دیا کیسے بابا کو منہ دکھا کر کیسے ضعیف بابا برچی کو نکالے گا کرب کی کہانی کوئی بھی سنائے گا کربل کی کہانی جا کوئی بھی سنائے گا دریا تھا سامنے پر آلے نبی تھے پیاسے بچوں کو بی زینب دیتی رہی دلاسے لو جا رہے غازی پانی ابھی آئے گا کربل کی کہانی کوئی بھی سنائے گا کربل کی کہانی جا کوئی بھی سنائے گا کربل کی کہانی جا اللهم نازل الفاتحة
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي هزت بفنائك وراحت برحلك عليك مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بكيت وبكي الليل والنهار ولا جعل الله آخر أهل مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولا وابن مولا. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبو الحسن مولانا علي بن مرسى الرضا وشفيعنا وشفيع والدي في يوم الجزاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليك يا إمامنا إمام الإنس والجان. أجل الله فرجك وسهل الله تعالى محرجك وظهور الأمر ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كل وليك حجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ووليا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.